He told me I was used up, worthless. 6 months later, I stood in that luxurious boardroom, signing his termination papers, wearing the wedding ring of the CEO who is now my husband. But to reach that moment, I had to fall to the depths of humiliation and rebuild myself from the ashes. At 62, I discovered that revenge isn't just about destroying someone who wronged you. It's about becoming everything they said you could never be. My name is Margaret Donovan, though everyone calls me Maggie, as I watched Richard stuff his personal belongings into a cardboard box, the same cheap kind we used for donations. I couldn't help but remember the day I'd served coffee in this very boardroom 40 years ago. Back then, I was invisible, just another secretary bringing refreshments to important men making important decisions. Now, I was the one who'd signed the termination letter that security had just handed him. "This is a mistake," Richard muttered, his hands trembling as he grabbed his framed MBA diploma from the wall. "You'll regret this, Margaret." I remained silent, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Seattle. The December rain streaked the glass, creating rivulets that distorted the city lights below. In the reflection, I could see myself clearly, silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing the navy Armani suit Charles had insisted I buy, the 3-carat diamond on my left hand catching the overhead lights. "Nothing to say?" Richard's voice cracked. "After everything I've done for this company?" I turned slowly, meeting his bloodshot eyes. The man who'd once towered over me, who'd made me feel so small, now looked pathetic. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his salt and pepper hair disheveled. The security guard shifted uncomfortably by the door, clearly wanting this scene to end. "What you've done for this company," I repeated softly, "is create a toxic environment, steal credit from junior employees, and falsify performance reports. It's all documented. Richard, every single transgression." His face flushed deep red. "This is personal. You're just bitter because you told me I was used up?" I finished for him. "That no one would want a 62-year-old woman who'd wasted her life being your personal assistant?" The words hung in the air between us. Even the security guard looked away, secondhand embarrassment radiating from his stance. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That's not... I didn't mean... Oh, but you did." I walked to the conference table, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each deliberate step. 6 months ago, at our son's engagement party, you announced to everyone that trading me in for a younger model would have been the smart move. Do you remember that, Richard? He set down the box, his shoulders sagging. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd married 4 decades ago. Young, ambitious, full of dreams we were going to chase together. But that man had died somewhere along the way, replaced by this cruel stranger who'd systematically destroyed my self-worth, year by year. "I was drunk," he offered weakly. "You were honest," I corrected. "For once in your life, you said exactly what you thought of me, and you know what? It was the greatest gift you ever gave me." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't pretend you're some kind of victim here. Margaret, you knew what you were doing when you went running to Charles." I smiled then, a real smile that reached my eyes. "I didn't run to anyone. Richard, I ran to myself. Charles just happened to be smart enough to see what you never could, that I had a brain, talent, and 40 years of institutional knowledge that made me invaluable to this company." "Invaluable," he scoffed. "Is that what you call sleeping your way to the top?" The security guard stiffened, ready to intervene, but I raised my hand slightly. This was my moment, my closure. "The only person who slept their way anywhere was you," I said calmly. "With your 28-year-old assistant, the one who filed the harassment complaint last month, the one whose testimony is part of your termination file." The color drained from his face. He hadn't known I knew about Jessica. 40 years, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. 40 years I stood by you, raised our children, supported your career, kept your secrets. I edited your reports, suggested strategies you claimed as your own, smoothed over your mistakes with clients. And how did you repay me? By diminishing me at every opportunity. By telling our friends I was just a housewife playing at business. by making me believe I was worthless without you. Richard grabbed his box, hugging it to his chest like armor. You destroyed my life. No, I said softly. You destroyed your own life the moment you decided I was disposable. I just documented it. As security escorted him out, I heard his parting shot. Charles will get tired of you too. You'll see. I returned to the window, watching the rain wash the city clean in the reflection. I saw Charles enter the boardroom, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He came to stand beside me, not touching, just offering his steady presence. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I considered the question. Was I all right? I just ended a 4-decade marriage, signed my ex-husband's professional death warrant, and stood accused of sleeping my way to a position I'd earned through merit. You know what? I said, turning to face the man who saw me as an equal, a partner, a force to be reckoned with. I'm better than all right. I'm free. The first time I met Richard Donovan, I was 22 and full of dreams. It was 1984, and I just graduated with my business degree, ready to conquer the corporate world when he was 25, working as a junior analyst at Whitmore Industries, the company where I'd landed a position as an executive assistant. With his dark hair slicked back and his confident smile, he looked like he'd stepped out of a Wall Street movie. You're too smart to be fetching coffee, he'd said during my first week, leaning against my desk with that practiced charm. Stick with me, and we'll both climb this ladder together. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony at St. Mary's. I wore my mother's dress, altered to fit the fashion of the 80s, and Richard promised to love, honor, and cherish me. Charles Whitmore himself attended, giving us a generous wedding gift and telling Richard he saw great potential in him. Those early years blur together now like watercolors in rain. Late nights reviewing Richard's presentations, me catching errors and suggesting improvements, weekend brunches where we dream about the future, his corner office, my MBA, the family we'd build. When Richard got his first promotion, we celebrated with champagne on our tiny apartment balcony. Seattle spread before us like a promise. Our son Michael was born in 1990. I took maternity leave, planning to return to work in 3 months. But Richard had other ideas. Why would you want to go back to being someone's secretary, he asked one evening, holding our baby while I heated up formula. I'm making enough now. You should focus on Michael. It seemed logical at the time. Richard was rising fast, his salary doubling, then tripling. When our daughter Sarah came along 2 years later, returning to work felt even more distant. I threw myself into motherhood, PTA meetings, and supporting Richard's career from behind the scenes. The changes came gradually, like erosion, so slow you don't notice until the cliff is gone. It started with small comments. Maggie doesn't really understand the technical side. He'd tell colleagues at dinner parties, even though I'd helped him prepare every presentation. She's better with the domestic sphere. Then came the dismissive gestures, the way he'd talk over me at social gatherings, how he'd laugh when I offered opinions on business matters. Stick to what you know, honey, became his favorite phrase, usually accompanied by a patronizing pat on my shoulder. I remember the exact moment I realized I'd become invisible in my own life. It was Michael's high school graduation in 2008. Richard was regaling other parents with a story about a major acquisition he'd spearheaded. I stood there, smile frozen, as he described the strategic approach, my approach, the one I'd mapped out on our kitchen table at 2 a.m. while he panicked about the presentation. Must be nice having such a successful husband. Another mother said to me, yes, I replied, the word tasting like ash. Very nice. The financial crisis that year changed everything at Whitmore Industries. People were laid off, departments restructured. Richard survived, even thrived, positioning himself as indispensable. What I didn't know then was how many people he'd thrown under the bus to keep his position, how many ideas he'd stolen, how many junior employees he'd blamed for his mistakes. By our 25th anniversary, we were strangers sharing a house. Richard had his life, work, golf, business trips that I later learned included more than business. I had mine, Charity committees, book clubs, maintaining the perfect facade of a successful executive's wife. "You've really let yourself go," he commented one evening, eyeing me over his reading glasses. I was 52, going through menopause, struggling with weight gain and hot flashes. "Maybe you should consider doing something about all this." He gestured vaguely at my body. I joined a gym, hired a nutritionist, bought expensive creams. Nothing was ever enough. When I colored my graying hair, he said I was trying too hard. When I let it go natural, he said I looked old. The children grew up and moved away. Michael to New York for banking, Sarah to Portland for architecture. They called Richard about promotions and deals. They called me about relationships and recipes. Even our children had learned their roles in the Donovan family hierarchy. "Why don't you go back to work?" Sarah suggested during one visit. "You have a degree, Mom, experience." Richard laughed from his recliner. "Who's going to hire a 60-year-old woman who hasn't worked in decades? Be realistic, Sarah." I stood in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher, pretending his words didn't cut deep. But they did. Every dismissal, every insult, every moment of being diminished, they all cut, creating thousands of tiny wounds that never quite healed. The worst part? I'd started to believe him. When I looked in the mirror, I saw what he told me was there. A used-up woman who'd wasted her potential, who had nothing to offer beyond keeping his house and maintaining his image. "I'm thinking of taking a class," I mentioned one day, showing him a community college brochure for digital marketing, just to keep my mind active. He didn't even look up from his tablet. "Waste of money. You wouldn't understand half of it anyway. Technologies move past you." "Maggie, accept it." I put the brochure in the recycling bin. Another dream discarded, another piece of myself erased. By the time I turned 60, I'd perfected the art of being invisible. Smile at his business dinners. Laugh at his jokes, even the ones at my expense. Pretend not to notice the way his young female colleagues looked at me with pity. Or worse, didn't look at me at all. "At least he didn't leave you," my mother said during one of her visits, as if staying was some kind of mercy. Many men his age trade in for younger models. I nodded, agreeing that I should be grateful for the crumbs of a marriage that had long ago stopped feeding my soul. After all, what options did I have? Richard had made sure I knew the answer. None. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and candlelight. Michael's engagement party was supposed to be perfect, and by all appearances, it was 200 guests, a string quartet, champagne flowing like water. Richard had spared no expense for his son's celebration, keen to impress the bride's family, who owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. I wore a midnight blue gown that had taken me weeks to find, one that Richard had grudgingly approved as adequate. My hair was professionally styled, makeup expertly applied. For once, I felt almost beautiful. Almost worthy of standing next to my successful husband and accomplished son. "Mom, you look stunning," Sarah whispered, squeezing my hand as we watched Michael and his fiancée, Jennifer, dance. "Really, you're glowing." Before I could respond, Richard's voice boomed across our table. Addressing Jennifer's parents and a cluster of business associates, he was well into his third scotch, his face flushed with alcohol and self-importance. "The secret to a lasting marriage," he declared, raising his glass, "is knowing when to upgrade and when to settle." Nervous laughter rippled through the group. My stomach clenched. "Now, I could have traded Maggie in years ago," he continued, gesturing toward me with his tumbler. "God knows I had opportunities. That little blonde from accounting in '98, the redhead from the Singapore office, even that yoga instructor at the club last year." "Richard," I whispered, heat flooding my face. "Please." He ignored me, warming to his theme. "But you know what? Sometimes it's just easier to keep the old model, like a classic car. Not much to look at anymore. Doesn't run like it used to. But you're familiar with all its quirks. Plus, divorce is expensive." He laughed at his own joke. "Cheaper to keep her, as they say." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's mother stared at her champagne flute. Her father cleared his throat and excused himself. Sarah's face had gone pale with fury. Besides, Richard added, oblivious to the discomfort he'd created, who else would want her at this point? 62 years old, no career, no prospects. She should be grateful I've kept her around this long. Most men would have moved on to a newer model by now. "Dad, that's enough," Michael said sharply, appearing at the table. But the damage was done. I sat frozen, a smile plastered on my face while inside. Something shattered. Not my heart. Richard had broken that years ago. This was deeper. This was my last shred of dignity, crumbling in front of everyone who mattered to me. "Excuse me," I managed, rising on unsteady legs. "I need to use the ladies' room." I made it to the bathroom before the tears came. Locked in a stall. I sobbed silently, my carefully applied makeup streaming down my face. 20 minutes passed before Sarah found me. "Mom." Her voice was gentle through the stall door. "Mom, please come out." "I can't," I whispered. "I can't go back out there." "You don't have to. I called you a cab. Let's go." I emerged, and she helped me clean up, her own eyes red with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom. He's a monster." "You know that, right?" Did I? After 40 years of being told I was worthless. Did I really know that? The ride home was silent. Sarah wanted to come with me, but I insisted she stay for Michael. This was his night, after all. It shouldn't be ruined because his father had decided to humiliate his mother. Again. Richard didn't come home until 3 in the morning. I heard him stumbling up the stairs, knocking into furniture. He fell into bed, fully clothed, reeking of scotch and cigars. "You embarrassed me tonight," he slurred, walking out like that, so dramatic. I lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." "Oh, please, it was just a joke. You're too sensitive. Always have been. You told a room full of people that I'm worthless, that you've thought about cheating on me, that the only reason you stay is because divorce is expensive." He rolled over, his back to me. "Well, it's true, isn't it? What would you do without me, Maggie? Where would you go? You've got nothing. You are nothing without me." I didn't sleep that night. As Richard snored beside me, I replayed every word, every dismissive comment, every cruel joke from the past 40 years. By dawn, I'd made my decision. The next evening, Richard came home to find me in the living room, 2 suitcases at my feet. "What's this?" He loosened his tie, barely glancing at the luggage. "Going to visit Sarah? I'm leaving you." He actually laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. Where would you go? Helen's offered me her guest room." "Your sister?" He shook his head, moving to pour himself a drink. "And then what? You'll live off her charity forever? Come on, Maggie. We both know you'll be back in a week." I stood, pulling on my coat. "The divorce papers will be filed Monday. I'm asking for what's fair. Half of everything we built during our marriage." His face darkened. "Everything I built? You mean you haven't worked a day in 40 years? Because you didn't want me to. Because you needed me here, supporting you, raising our children, managing our home, editing your work, being your unpaid therapist and social secretary. No judge is going to give you half of anything," he snarled. "You're a 62-year-old woman with no job skills, no recent work history, nothing to offer anyone. You think you're going to start over, find some new life. You're used up. Maggie, past your expiration date. No one else will want you. And without me, you'll have nothing." I picked up my suitcases, my hands surprisingly steady. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am used up. Maybe no one will want me. Maybe I'll struggle and fail and end up with nothing. But Richard? Nothing has to be better than this. "You'll be back," he called as I headed for the door. "When reality hits, when you realize what you've thrown away, you'll come crawling back." I paused at the threshold, looking back at the man I'd wasted 40 years loving. He stood there with his scotch, so certain of my failure, so sure I couldn't survive without him. "Goodbye, Richard." The door closed behind me with a soft click. As I loaded my suitcases into my car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. The woman looking back was 62 years old, unemployed, scared, and about to start over with nothing but 2 suitcases and a shattered heart. But for the first time in decades, she was free. Helen's guest room smelled like lavender and missed opportunities. A single bed with a quilt our grandmother made, a small dresser, one window overlooking her vegetable garden. My entire world now fit into a 10 by 12-foot space. It's temporary, Helen assured me, setting down a cup of tea. Just until you get on your feet. Get on my feet, at 62, with no job, no credit history in my own name, and 40 years of being told I was worthless. Richard's words echoed in the small room, used up, past your expiration date. The first week was the hardest. I'd wake at 5:30 out of habit, ready to make Richard's coffee, iron his shirts, review his schedule. Instead, I'd lie in the narrow bed, staring at unfamiliar ceiling cracks, paralyzed by the question, "What now? You need to apply for jobs," Helen said gently one morning, finding me still in my pajamas at noon. "Anything to start building your resume again." I tried. God, how I tried. But every online application felt like a monument to my failures. Employment gap, 40 years. Recent experience, none. References, a husband who'd rather see me homeless than successful. The rejection emails came swiftly. "Thank you for your interest, but we've selected a candidate whose qualifications, unfortunately, your experience doesn't match." After 2 weeks of this, I stopped trying. What was the point? Richard was right. I was unemployable, worthless, a 62-year-old woman with nothing to offer the world. I should just go back, I told Helen one evening, pushing pasta around my plate. I'd burned it. Couldn't even manage a simple dinner anymore. At least with Richard, I knew my place. Your place? Helen's voice was sharp. Your place was being emotionally abused for 40 years. Is that really better than this? Was it? At least there. I had a purpose. Even if that purpose was being Richard's doormat, here. I was just taking up space in my sister's home, burning dinners, failing at everything I touched. The credit card applications were rejected one by one. Banks looked at my history, always a secondary name on Richard's accounts, and saw nothing worth risking. The apartment applications met similar fates. No income, no credit, no rental history of my own. "Ma'am, perhaps you could get a co-signer?" One property manager suggested kindly. "Maybe your husband?" I laughed until I cried. Sarah visited on weekends, bringing groceries and forced cheer. "Mom, you're going to get through this. You're stronger than you think." But I wasn't strong. I was a frightened woman who jumped every time the phone rang, hoping and dreading it might be Richard, who couldn't figure out how to use LinkedIn, who had panic attacks in grocery stores because I'd never had to budget before. Richard had controlled all the finances. 3 weeks in, I hit rock bottom. Another day of rejection emails, another dinner ruined, another night of Helen pretending she wasn't tired of having a useless house guest. I sat on the guest room floor, surrounded by old photo albums I'd grabbed in my hasty exit, wondering if drowning in memories was better than facing reality. That's when I found it. Tucked between photos from a company Christmas party in 2005, a folded letter on Whitmore Industries' letterhead. I'd forgotten it existed. This note Charles Whitmore had written after I'd helped organize the annual shareholders meeting. "Margaret," it read in his distinctive handwriting, "your strategic thinking and attention to detail transformed what could have been a disaster into our most successful meeting to date. Richard is fortunate to have such an intelligent partner. If you ever consider returning to the corporate world, I would be honored to provide a recommendation. Your talents are wasted in the shadows." I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. Charles Whitmore, the CEO himself, had seen value in me, had recognized my contributions, had offered to help, but that was 20 years ago. Surely he wouldn't remember. Surely he'd retired by now. Surely... "What have you got to lose?" Helen asked when I showed her the letter. "The worst he can say is no. You're already hearing that from everyone else." She was right. Rock bottom meant there was nowhere to go but up. Or deeper into the earth. Either way, I had to try. I spent the next week preparing like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. The local library became my office. I researched current business trends, studied Whitmore Industries' recent developments, practiced my rusty computer skills on their free terminals. The librarian, a kind woman named Dorothy, helped me create a simple resume that somehow made 40 years of unpaid labor sound like executive experience. Household CEO, she suggested with a wink. Managed complex scheduling, budgets, and strategic planning for a high-net-worth family enterprise. It was generous. It was probably ridiculous, but it was better than unemployed housewife. Finding Charles's current contact information took detective work. He was still CEO at 75. The man showed no signs of slowing down. His assistant's email was listed on the company website. With trembling fingers, I composed a message. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I hope this message finds you well. 20 years ago, you kindly offered to provide a recommendation if I ever chose to return to the corporate world. I find myself at that crossroads now. I rewrote it 17 times before hitting send. Then I waited. The response came at 11:45 that night. I'd been lying awake, staring at my phone, when the email notification appeared. Margaret, I remember you well. Your husband mentioned you'd separated. I'd be happy to meet and discuss possibilities. Are you available for lunch Tuesday at 1? Charles? I sat up so fast I nearly fell off the narrow bed. He remembered me. He was willing to meet. It wasn't a job offer, wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it was a chance. Helen. I stumbled into the hallway, waving my phone. He responded, Charles Whitmore wants to meet. My sister emerged from her room, hair in curlers, face cream making her shine in the hallway light. That's wonderful. What will you wear? What would I wear? I hadn't thought that far. My wardrobe consisted of outdated suburban mom clothes and a few formal dresses for Richard's events. Nothing that said, hire me despite my 40-year employment gap. We'll figure it out, Helen said firmly. Goodwill has professional clothes. Will make you look like the executive you should have been all along. That night, for the first time since leaving Richard, I felt something other than despair. Not quite hope. I wasn't ready for that yet. But maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as used up as he'd made me believe. The Goodwill blazer was navy blue, slightly worn at the elbows but clean, paired with gray slacks and a white blouse Helen had lent me. I looked professional enough. Not executive material, perhaps, but better than the defeated woman who'd been crying into photo albums just days before. Stand up straight, Helen commanded, adjusting my collar. You're not asking for charity. You're a capable woman with 4 decades of experience. Experience in what? Making coffee and picking up dry cleaning? Experience in managing complex schedules, organizing events, handling difficult personalities, multitasking under pressure. She gripped my shoulders. Maggie, you ran that man's entire life while he took credit for your ideas. That's not nothing. I practiced my pitch in the bathroom mirror until the words stopped feeling like lies. I managed a household that frequently entertained executives and international clients. I coordinated complex travel arrangements. I edited and improved business presentations. All true. Even if it sounded pathetic compared to real corporate experience, the morning of the lunch, I woke at 4:30, too nervous to sleep. By the time I needed to leave, I'd changed blouses 3 times, redone my makeup twice, and nearly talked myself out of going completely. What if he was just being polite? I asked Helen. What if he takes one look at me and realizes I'm exactly what Richard said, used up? Then you'll be no worse off than you are now, she said firmly, pushing me toward the door. Go. Find out what you're really worth. The restaurant Charles had chosen was elegant but understated, the kind of place where deals were made over aged steaks and expensive wine. I arrived 15 minutes early, sitting in my car practicing deep breathing exercises Sarah had taught me for anxiety. At 12:55, I walked in. The hostess looked through me initially. I'd grown accustomed to being invisible, but perked up when I mentioned Charles Whitmore's name. Right this way. Mrs. Donovan, Mr. Whitmore is already here. He sat at a corner table, reading something on his tablet, silver-haired now, with more lines around his eyes, but still commanding the room with quiet authority. He stood when he saw me, a gesture Richard had stopped making 30 years ago. Margaret. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. You look well. I almost laughed. I looked like a 62-year-old woman wearing Goodwill's finest. trying to pretend I belonged in his world. But I managed to smile. "Thank you for seeing me, Charles. Please, sit. I've ordered some wine. I remember you preferred Pinot Grigio at company events." He remembered my wine preference from 20 years ago. I sat, trying not to show how that small detail made me want to cry. "So," he said after we'd ordered, his blue eyes kind but direct, "tell me what you're looking for." I'd practiced this part, but the words still felt strange. "I need to work. Not just for the money, though that's certainly part of it. I need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I'm capable of more than I've been allowed to be." "Allowed?" His eyebrow raised slightly. Richard had very specific ideas about my role. I said carefully, "I'm learning now that those ideas were limiting." Charles nodded slowly. "I've known Richard for 35 years, watched him climb the ladder, sometimes stepping on others to get higher. I've also watched you at company events. Margaret, you have a gift for seeing the big picture, for understanding how pieces fit together. That shareholders meeting you helped organize, still our gold standard. That was 20 years ago. Good instincts don't expire." He leaned back, studying me. "What would you say to starting as a consultant, project-based work, focusing on event planning and stakeholder relations? See how it goes?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "You're offering me work. I'm offering you a chance to prove what I've suspected for years, that the wrong Donovan was working for me." I stared at him, speechless. He continued, "The contract would be modest to start, but if you can deliver what I think you can, we'll discuss a permanent position." "Charles, I don't know what to say. My resume is essentially blank. I haven't worked in an office since the 80s. Can you use email? Yes. Can you organize a meeting? Of course. Can you see problems before they become disasters and find creative solutions?" I thought of 40 years of managing Richard's chaos, smoothing his rough edges, fixing his mistakes before anyone noticed. "Yes, then you're already ahead of half my staff." He signaled the waiter for the check. "There's a product launch next month. The planning is a mess. The team is overwhelmed, and I need someone who can pull it together. Interested?" "Yes." The word came out stronger than I felt. "Absolutely yes." As we waited for the check, Charles mentioned casually, "You know, Richard always said you were content being a homemaker, that you had no interest in business. Richard said a lot of things that weren't true. I'm beginning to see that." He handed me a business card, not his, but his assistant's. "Clara will send you the contract details. Can you start Monday?" "Monday. 5 days to transform from discarded wife to professional consultant. I'll be ready." Walking back to my car, I caught my reflection in a shop window. Same Goodwill blazer, same borrowed blouse, same 62-year-old face, but something was different. The woman looking back stood straighter, her chin higher. I sat in my car and called Helen. "I got it. He offered me consulting work." Her shriek of joy was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I knew it. I knew you could do it." "It's just a start," I cautioned. But I was smiling. Project-based, modest pay. I might fail spectacularly, or you might soar. That night, I spread the business plan notes across Helen's kitchen table. Ideas I'd suggested to Richard over the years. Strategies he'd dismissed or claimed as his own. I organized them, updated them, created a presentation for the product launch that showcased not just the product, but the story behind it. "You're glowing," Helen observed. "Bringing me tea at midnight? I haven't seen you like this in years." I looked up from my work, realizing she was right. For the first time in decades, I was using my brain for something beyond household logistics. I was creating, strategizing, thinking. I'd forgotten, I admitted, what it felt like to be more than Richard's wife. Helen squeezed my shoulder. "You were never just Richard's wife. He just made you believe that was all you could be." I worked until 3 in the morning, energized by possibility. Richard's voice still echoed sometimes. "Used up, worthless. Who would want you?" But it was getting quieter, drowned out by the sound of my own thoughts taking shape. Monday couldn't come fast enough. I had a chance to prove Richard wrong, but more importantly, to prove myself right. I wasn't just the discarded wife of a middle manager. I was Margaret Donovan, and I was just getting started. The product launch was a triumph. 3 weeks of 18-hour days, coordinating vendors, managing temperamental executives, and turning chaos into choreographed success. When Charles stood at the podium that night, announcing record-breaking pre-orders, he caught my eye across the ballroom and raised his champagne glass in silent acknowledgement. "You saved us." Clara, his assistant, whispered as we watched from the back. "That disaster with the venue double booking? The speaker who canceled last minute? I don't know how you pulled it off." I knew exactly how. 40 years of making Richard look good had taught me to anticipate problems, have backup plans for backup plans, and never let them see you sweat. The only difference was that this time, the credit would be mine. Charles found me during the reception, guiding me to a quiet corner. "Walk with me." We stepped onto the terrace overlooking the Seattle waterfront, the city lights reflected on the dark water, and for a moment we stood in comfortable silence. "I have a confession," he said finally. "I've been watching Richard undervalue you for years. Every company event, every shareholders meeting. I saw you in the background, making everything run smoothly while he took the bows." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" he sighed. "Would you have listened? Sometimes people need to find their own moment of clarity." He was right, even a year ago. I would have defended Richard, made excuses, believed his version of my worth. And now? Now I'd like to offer you a permanent position, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. The board meets Thursday to approve it, but I don't anticipate any objections. Not after tonight. Vice President. The title Richard had chased for 20 years and never quite reached. "Charles, I'm flattered, but no buts. You've proven yourself. The team respects you. More importantly, you've shown vision and leadership that's been sorely lacking." He turned to face me. "Unless there's another reason you're hesitating?" There was, though I couldn't quite name it. Fear? Imposter syndrome? The ghost of Richard's voice insisting I wasn't capable? "I need to think about it," I said honestly. "Of course. Take the weekend." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I should mention the position comes with a corner office, 10th floor, excellent view." After he left, I remained on the terrace, trying to process the sudden shift in my life. 6 weeks ago, I'd been crying on Helen's guest room floor. Now I was being offered a position that would put me several rungs above Richard on the corporate ladder he'd spent decades climbing. My phone buzzed. Sarah. "Mom, just heard about the launch. Everyone's talking about how amazing it was. So proud of you." Then Michael. "Dad called. He's heard about your new job. He sounded weird. You okay?" Richard. Of course he'd heard. Whitmore Industries was a small world, and gossip traveled fast. I could imagine his reaction, the disbelief, the anger, the humiliation of his discarded wife succeeding where he'd plateaued. I drove home to Helen's, my mind spinning. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside. My stomach clenched. Richard? But the man who emerged wasn't Richard. It was Charles. "Forgive the ambush," he said. Looking slightly embarrassed, I realized after we talked that I hadn't been entirely honest about my motivations. Helen appeared at the door, took one look at us, and discreetly retreated inside. "What do you mean?" I asked, though my heart was already racing with possibility. Charles ran a hand through his silver hair, suddenly looking less like a CEO and more like a nervous teenager. "When I said I'd been watching you all these years, it wasn't just professional admiration. Margaret, I've been drawn to you since the first time we met. Your intelligence, your grace, the way you light up when you're solving problems." I stared at him, speechless. I never acted on it. Of course, you were married and I respect boundaries. But now... He stepped closer. "Now you're free. And I find myself hoping that this job offer isn't the only proposal you'll consider." "Charles," I breathed. "I'm 62 years old. I'm barely divorced. I'm living in my sister's guest room." "You're brilliant," he countered. "You're beautiful. You're finally becoming who you were always meant to be. And I'd like to be part of that journey. If you'll have me. This is crazy. We've barely spent time together outside of work. Then let's change that. Dinner tomorrow? Not to discuss business, just us. I thought of Richard's words. No one else will want you. Yet here stood Charles Whitmore, successful, respected, kind, looking at me like I was precious. Dinner, I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. But Charles, I need to take this slowly. I'm still figuring out who I am without Richard. I've waited 35 years, he said with a gentle smile. I can be patient a little longer. After he left, I found Helen practically vibrating with excitement in the kitchen. Charles Whitmore has been in love with you for decades. This is like a movie. It's terrifying, I corrected, sinking into a chair. What if I'm just rebounding? What if he realizes I'm not worth the trouble? Helen knelt beside me, taking my hands. What if you're finally getting everything Richard said you couldn't have? A career, respect, and a man who sees your value. That night, I lay in the narrow guest bed, staring at the ceiling. In 6 weeks, I'd gone from worthless to wanted, from discarded to desired. It felt surreal, like I might wake up back in Richard's house, trapped in my old life. But the business card on my nightstand was real. The job offer was real. Charles's feelings were real. My phone lit up with another text from Michael. Whatever you're doing, Mom, keep doing it. I've never seen you this happy. Happy? Was that what this feeling was? This mixture of terror and excitement, of possibility and purpose? I thought about the corner office Charles had mentioned, the view of the city where I'd spent 40 years being invisible. Soon, I'd be looking down at it from a place of power, making decisions that mattered, using the brain Richard had insisted was only good for domestic tasks. I am not used up, I whispered to the darkness, the words feeling like a prayer and a promise. I am not worthless. I am not nothing. For the first time in 40 years, I believed it. 6 months later, I stood in my corner office. Yes, I'd accepted the position, reviewing quarterly reports when Clara knocked. Mrs. Donovan, there's something you need to see. She handed me a folder marked Confidential HR Investigation. Inside were testimonies, emails, and documentation that made my blood run cold. Richard's name appeared on every page. How long has this been going on? I asked, sinking into my leather chair. The investigation started 3 months ago. Multiple complaints from female employees about hostile work environment, inappropriate comments, and... She hesitated, taking credit for subordinates' work. There's a pattern going back years. Jessica Morrison's complaint was just the tip of the iceberg. As I read through the statements, I saw Richard's systematic abuse of power laid bare. Young analysts whose ideas he'd stolen, administrative assistants he'd belittled, a junior manager who'd left the company after Richard sabotaged her promotion. Why am I seeing this? I asked, though I suspected the answer. The board wants your input on how to proceed, given your unique perspective and your current position. Charles felt you should be involved in the decision. My unique perspective, being married to the monster for 40 years. That evening, Charles and I sat in his study. We'd been dating for 5 months, taking things slowly as I'd requested. He'd been patient, romantic, everything Richard had never been. We'd kept our relationship discreet at work, but anyone paying attention could see the change in both of us. You don't have to be part of this, he said gently, pouring wine. I can handle Richard's situation without your involvement. No, I said firmly. I need to do this. For all the women he's hurt, for all the careers he's destroyed. I paused. For me. Charles took my hand. The board is recommending termination. The evidence is overwhelming. Good. There's more. He looked uncomfortable. The forensic audit found discrepancies in his expense reports, falsified client dinners, phantom travel expenses. It's fraud, Margaret. I thought of all the times Richard had come home from supposed business trips smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. All the client dinners where I'd later learned from wives that their husbands hadn't attended. I'd been naive, or perhaps willfully blind. He always was greedy, I murmured. This could end his career permanently. No one will hire him after this. 6 months ago, that might have bothered me. Now, he made his choices. The investigation took another month. I threw myself into work, launching 3 successful initiatives that exceeded revenue projections. The board was impressed. Charles was proud. But the shadow of Richard's impending termination loomed. "You know what the really pathetic part is?" I told Helen one evening. "He still doesn't know I'm the VP. He thinks I'm just consulting. How is that possible? He never asks the kids about me, never looked me up on LinkedIn. As far as he's concerned, I'm still nothing." I smiled grimly. He's about to get a surprise. The termination meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. HR insisted on security presence. Richard had a temper, and cornered animals were dangerous. As the senior executive overseeing strategic initiatives, my presence was required. I dressed carefully that morning, the charcoal Armani suit Charles had bought me for my birthday, the Louboutin heels that made me feel powerful, the diamond earrings I'd bought myself with my first VP bonus. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone Richard wouldn't recognize, a confident executive who belonged in that boardroom. Charles kissed me goodbye at home. We'd been practically living together for 2 months. "You don't have to do this," he reminded me. "Yes, I do." I arrived early, reviewing the termination documents one last time. Expense fraud, hostile work environment, sexual harassment, theft of intellectual property. The man I'd spent 40 years with had been a corporate predator, and I'd been his first victim. At 10 o'clock sharp, Richard walked in. He was telling his assistant about his golf plans for the weekend when he saw the assembled group: HR director, legal counsel, security, and me. He did a double take when he saw me, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "Mrs. Donovan is Vice President of Strategic Initiatives," the HR director said calmly. "She's here in her official capacity." "Vice President?" Richard's voice cracked. "That's impossible. She's nothing. She's my wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected quietly. "And as VP, I'm required to be present for all senior-level terminations." The HR director began reading the charges. With each accusation, Richard's face grew redder, but his eyes never left me, burning with hatred and humiliation. "This is your doing," he spat when she finished. "You poisoned them against me. You seduced Charles to get this position." "Actually," I said, sliding the forensic audit across the table, "your own actions did this. 23 falsified expense reports, 14 documented cases of harassment, 8 stolen proposals from junior staff. It's all here. Richard, in black and white. You vindictive bitch. I gave you everything." "No," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You took everything, my confidence, my career, my self-worth. You made me believe I was nothing, but you were wrong." Security stepped forward as Richard rose from his chair, fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Margaret. I'll destroy you. I'll tell everyone what you really are, a pathetic old woman who slept her way to the top." "You can try," I said, standing to face him. "But who's going to listen? You're about to be escorted from the building with a cardboard box, banned from the industry for fraud and harassment. I'm a respected VP with a proven track record, so tell me, Richard, which one of us is pathetic?" The security guard touched his elbow. "Sir, we need to collect your badge and keys." I watched him deflate, the reality finally hitting. His career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and the woman he'd thrown away like garbage had been the one to sign his professional death warrant. As they let him out, he turned back one last time. "I hope you're happy," he said bitterly. "I am," I replied. "For the first time in 40 years, I truly am." After he left, I remained in the boardroom, staring at the chair where he'd sat. The HR director touched my shoulder gently. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said, and meant it. "It's over. Finally over." That evening, Charles held me as I cried, not from sadness but from release. 40 years of marriage reduced to a cardboard box and a security escort. But from those ashes, I'd built something Richard never could have imagined. "No regrets?" Charles asked, stroking my hair. "None," I said, looking at my engagement ring. Charles had proposed the week before, and I'd said yes. He was right about one thing, though I did find a better man, but more importantly, I found myself. "That's my girl," he murmured, "the strongest woman I know," as I drifted off to sleep in the arms of a man who valued me. I thought about Richard's parting words. Was I happy? Absolutely. The security guard's walkie-talkie crackled. "Mister, Donovan has left the premises." I watched from my 10th floor window as Richard emerged onto the sidewalk below, clutching his cardboard box like a life preserver. He stood there for a long moment, looking lost, before walking toward the parking garage. From this height, he looked small, insignificant, the way he'd made me feel for 40 years. "Margaret?" Clara appeared at my door. "The staff meeting is in 15 minutes. Thank you. I'll be right there." I turned from the window. Leaving Richard to his fate, there was work to do, a company to help run, a life to live. The meeting was about next quarter's strategic initiatives, my vision, my leadership. As I entered the conference room, the team stood and applauded. Word had spread quickly about the morning's events, and they knew what it meant. The toxic influence that had poisoned the department for years was gone. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "But let's focus on the future, not the past. We have ambitious goals to achieve." 3 hours later, as we wrapped up the productive session, my phone buzzed. "Sarah, Dad called. He's moving to Phoenix to live with Uncle Ray. Says Seattle has nothing left for him." Nothing left for him. The house we'd shared, the country club membership, the social circle, all gone. His credit cards frozen pending the fraud investigation. His professional network severed. The man who'd told me I'd have nothing without him had discovered who truly had nothing alone. That evening, Charles and I hosted our first dinner party in our new home. We'd bought it together, both names on the deed, equal partners in everything. Helen was there, along with Sarah, Michael and Jennifer, and several colleagues who'd become friends. "A toast," Charles said, raising his glass, "to second chances and new beginnings." To Maggie, Helen added, who proved that our best chapters can come after 60. As glasses clinked and laughter filled our dining room, I felt a completeness I'd never experienced in 40 years of marriage to Richard. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about living the life I'd always deserved. "Mom." Michael pulled me aside after dinner. "I need to apologize. All those years. I saw how Dad treated you, and I said nothing. I thought it was just how marriages worked. You were a child," I said gently. "It wasn't your responsibility to fix your parents' marriage. Maybe not, but I'm proud of you now. Jennifer and I, we're taking notes. Equal partnership, mutual respect, supporting each other's dreams. You're showing us how it should be done." Later, as Charles and I cleaned up together, he washed, I dried, a simple domestic dance between equals. He asked, "Any word on what Richard plans to do in Phoenix?" "Sarah says he's talking about consulting, though who would hire him now? I can't imagine. Do you ever wonder if you should feel guilty for how it all ended?" I considered this, drying a wine glass carefully. He had 40 years to treat me with respect, 40 years to see my value, 40 years to be a decent human being to the people around him. He chose differently every single day. So no, Charles, I don't feel guilty. I feel free. 6 weeks later, our wedding was small but perfect. Sarah as my maid of honor, Michael walking me down the aisle, Helen crying happy tears in the front row. Charles's eyes never left mine as we exchanged vows, promises of partnership, respect, and love between equals. "You look radiant," he whispered as we danced at the reception. "I feel radiant," I replied, like I'm finally living my real life. Richard sent a card. Bitter. Predictable. "Hope you're happy with your sugar daddy. Don't come crying to me when he trades you in for a younger model like I should have." I tossed it in the trash without a second thought. His opinion no longer mattered. It never should have. As I write this, it's been a year since that horrible night at Michael's engagement party. A year since Richard told me I was used up, worthless, that no one else would want me. I'm 63 now. running a department that's exceeded every projection, married to a man who sees me as his equal and inspiration, surrounded by people who value what I bring to the table. Richard? Sarah tells me he's living in a studio apartment, working part-time at a small firm that didn't check references too carefully. He's alone, bitter, clinging to past glories that were half built on my uncredited work anyway. Sometimes she says he asks about me, whether I'm happy, whether I ever mention him. I don't. He's a closed chapter in my story, a lesson learned, a reminder of who I refuse to remain. My office phone rings. It's Charles, asking if I'm free for lunch. We still date each other, still make time for romance amid the busy schedules. He sends flowers every Tuesday, just because I leave love notes in his briefcase. We're building something beautiful on a foundation of mutual respect. I'll be right down, I tell him, smiling at the anticipation in his voice. I gather my things, catch my reflection in the office window. The woman looking back stands tall, confident, successful. She is loved and valued. She's nobody's property, nobody's afterthought, nobody's regret. She's not used up. She's not worthless. She's not nothing. She's everything Richard said she could never be, and more. And that, as they say, is the best revenge. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your experiences and insights make our community richer. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to reclaim your worth and write a new chapter in your life.